thing where they made it through the Triassic extinction, but they died soon after. But all of these died when things got good. 18 out of 20 made it through terrible times, and then when things got really good for reef building should be a good time for corals, they went extinct. All 18 of them went extinct within a few million years. They went extinct about here. I'm sorry, I'm incurable. They went extinct right about here, and 100 genera originated in a few million years. But this might be why. I've never heard of one coral actually sending another to extinction, but when things are really good, the branching corals just grow fast, and even though they don't have good survival for any stresses, things are good. So they grow fast, and here's some very tolerant mound corals, and they're not doing so well. And here's another mound coral, and look, the branching corals are made for speed. And I don't think they're competing for space or competition. I don't think competition has to do with it. They're just growing fast so they can get a lot of surface area, which means a lot of polyps, which means a lot of eggs. And so natural selection is operating on how many offspring they produce, not on whether they take over the space or not. And once again, our slow-growing corals, though, those ones I just showed you were all Triassic originating, and they weren't as good as the ones we have now, are very tolerant. This is one that was in the Cretaceous that's still with us here in Guam, and that's Diplostria. And it really fits the picture of those that are good for survival, and I don't see that much recruitment in this thing. But when crown of thorns goes through on, I forget the name of the reef there, I remember swimming over and there were no corals except one big Diplostria. It's really good at defending itself against temperature and crown of thorns and everything. And it's from the Cretaceous. And this is the same species as far as anybody can tell. This is a blue coral, and that originated about 130 million years ago, and it went off through all of those stressful times. And it is not eaten by crown of thorns, and it is very tolerant of bleaching. Anyway, I'll round it up with this, that corals are going to survive, I think, but we're not going to have reefs. And we can do all of these things to help prevent erosion, which is a good thing to do. We want to keep the corals and we want to keep the reefs productive. We want to keep the best we can. But in the end, we're not going to keep the reefs unless we can do something really significant and stop the CO2 emissions. And that's all I have to say. I think I'm on time. I even have time for some questions. So. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you wish. Yes?
I'm just a member of the public and I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. So if you don't mind briefly explaining what is a reef? I just thought it was an accumulation of coral.
No, accumulation of coral we call a group of corals or a colony or a community or something, a community or association. A reef is a massive structure that has been laid down, so it's a real physical massive structure. I think the term reef comes from something Nordic for big rock things that the ships might run against. So it originated as a word of something that might cause a ship to sink because it runs into it. But it's a massive structure. But the corals can deposit at expense, even in very acidic conditions. They can deposit the calcium carbonate, but they can't do it enough, like the obesity thing. You know, if you're running all the time and eating very little, it's taking you all your energy just to stay alive, you're not going to get fat. Well, you're not going to produce reefs. But as I was saying, reefs are a byproduct. They don't really matter if you've got lots of corals. They're a byproduct of having the corals where it's cheap and easy to deposit calcium carbonate. Does that answer your question?
So basically, it's just a large structure of old corals.
It's a large structure that was laid down, made by corals. And you can have reefs make other things too, made by other things too. They keep accumulating and growing up. Like reefs can be, hundreds of feet thick. Well, as a matter of fact, it can be almost a mile thick. Like Inuit, they drilled down 4,500 feet of reef. Now, each coral, that's really amazing what corals, nothing in the world has ever made structures like reefs have. Humans have never made anything like a coral reef. Because you think about Inuit, that's calcium carbonate made by this couple millimeters of tissue. The coral has almost just a very thin tissue, and it deposited 4,500 feet, and that was just that drill. They may have gone further than that in many other places. Many atolls are thousands of feet thick. So the coral itself is only a few millimeters thick of a very thin tissue. And then the colony, or the coralline, or the colony, is maybe the size of your fist, or maybe even a few meters across. But the reef can be thousands of feet.
Would it be like saying it's a structure built by organisms?
Yeah.
So it's not like rocks or soil. It's what's left over. What's been built by living organisms.
It was actually deposited, calcification is laying down calcium carbonate, and just hundreds of years after hundreds of years, just a little bit at a time. I think a centimeter a year is what we used to think reefs could grow, but they can't grow that fast usually. It's just millimeters a year. So when you're looking at a reef that's a few meters thick, it's going to be like 1,000 years or hundreds of years. It's a very slow process.
And I'm sorry if I'm sending everybody back, but why is the carbon dioxide back?
Oh, well, okay, that's a long answer. As you know, it reflects heat. So, by the way, the two times when the CO2 was in the air, was not in the air, was recent times until humans started putting it back. But that was a neogene. And then back when you had the Carboniferous era, when the plants took all the CO2 out of the air and put it in as coal. Well, those are when you had ice ages, because all of the heat was escaping, and it got very cold. Ice ages have been very rare as far as what's been. Through the time of the dinosaurs, there was no ice. But when, in fact, the temperature at the North Pole in the seawater was about the same as Hawaii is in the winter now, about 20 degrees centigrade. So you could go swimming at the North Pole without a wetsuit. But we are in, by the way, another thing the public often doesn't realize, geologists call it an ice age now. We are in an ice age, and we have been for many millions of years. That's if you have ice at the South Pole and the North Pole, and you have glaciers anywhere, then you're in an ice age. And during the time of dinosaurs, there just weren't ice ages. And so that's when you don't have CO2. But most of the time, as I showed you on the very first slide, you have much more CO2 than you have now, although we're putting it back up there. And that's when it gets very hot. And corals are not adapted to hot temperatures. It upsets the symbiosis. I'm sorry, I'm sort of assuming most of the audience knows about symbiosis. That's where the little algal cells, the dinoflagellates, live in the coral tissue. And if the temperature changes, their system gets all out of whack, and they start being toxic or